Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to recommend 6 books that represent the softer side of true crime. True crime has really been enjoying a renaissance over the past decade or so, with everyone flocking to the new murder podcasts, with the Oxygen Network rebranding to exclusively true crime programming, and then books like I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, all about the Golden State Killer, sitting on the New York Times bestseller list for months at a time. The popularity of the genre is quite evident. But there are many valid arguments against the current collective true crime obsession. And while that's largely a conversation for another video, the crux of the argument lies in the fact that a lot of true crime focuses on murder. A lot of people don't want to focus on murder or think that we, as a society, shouldn't be focusing so much on murder. So in today's video, I would like to recommend you 6 true crime books that have nothing to do with murder. Instead, these books are all about thieving. A number of them are natural history adjacent, a couple of them deal with printed matter, but all of them talk about a situation where a person takes something that does not belong to them, and each one of them questions why the culprit would have felt inspired to do such a thing. I'm going to start off by talking about the books that I think are the most well done, that I think are most deserving of your time. And as I go down the list, I will be talking about books that I didn't enjoy quite as much, but ones that I think still might be worth a read if you're interested in the subject matter, or if you know that this genre is very much your thing. So here we go. The book that I think is the best book out of this array of tales of thievery is The Feather Thief by Kirk Wallace Johnson. This is the story of an American music student who broke into the British Museum of Natural History in order to steal priceless specimens. His motivation to take them came from an obsession with a very antiquated hobby of Victorian fly tying. To put it simply, this kid broke into the museum and stole priceless specimens for their feathers so that they could be used for fishing lures that would never be used. As every book on this list does, it doesn't just talk about the central crime, it also provides background information on the culprit, for example, and it also provides additional information on subjects that are some way connected back to that central crime. So really all of these books become a really interesting mashup of genres. In this case, you get a history of the art of Victorian fly tying. You get a history of the specific specimens that he stole from the British Museum. You find out how the hobby of Victorian fly tying has persisted into the modern day, and you also get a hint at just what those feathers he took were worth. This is the book that got me into this very oddly specific subgenre, and while none of the books on this list could be called thrilling, at least in the traditional sense, with all the side information you're learning and how invested the authors get into the story, it really does feel that by reading these books, you're peering through a peephole into a very narrow world. Kirk Wallace Johnson does indeed get very invested in this story. He even goes on to do some of his own investigative work, which probably makes this one the easiest to fly through. Pardon the pun. If you are only going to read one book off of this list, or you're looking for a good place to start, I definitely suggest you start with this one. But if you don't want to read that one, or if you've already read that one and you're looking for a follow-up, look no further than The Falcon Thief by Joshua Hammer. The thief in this book is a man who was caught smuggling peregrine falcon eggs in an airport. And not only that, they were taped to his stomach. When you see pictures of it, it looks like a very twisted take on the Easter Bunny. He was attempting to take these eggs to the Middle East to sell them to wealthy elites who use them as status symbols and also in the hobby of falcon racing. In this book, you get a look into a number of different things. Of course, the history of falconry, the lives of the wealthy in the Middle East, the history of egg collecting, but also the problem of wildlife poaching and what wildlife detectives are doing to combat it. In a much more significant way than in The Feather Thief, you get to know the perpetrator, and he's probably the most likable of any thief on this list. The relationship that he has with the main wildlife detective who's chasing him is very catch me if you can, bird egg edition. The book as a whole has a well-organized, tight narrative. It is definitely worthy of the second spot on this list. Now on to the others. The next 2 are all about printed matter. The first of those being The Map Thief by Michael Blanding, which is all about a very well-respected map dealer who was caught stealing them from the Yale University Library. The side information information here, of course, revolves around the maps themselves, the history of cartography, their ties to exploration, the significance and value of some maps over others, like if an early edition of a map has a specific error before something was known about the way the world is, then that map is more significant and therefore more valuable. And also information about when the hobby of map collecting began. What I think is interesting to note at this point in the list is that as you start reading more and more of this style of book, you start to notice that there are a variety of different motives for these individuals to steal these objects. Your first thought is automatically, they're doing this for the money, and that's not untrue, but there's more to it than that. A lot of this book's focus is on the poor business sense of the thief, and you start to feel this inevitability of more crimes because this guy really knows his stuff when it comes to maps, but he just has absolutely no decision-making skills when it comes to business. So while money is the motivating factor for a lot of these crimes, it's not always because of greed. And that's definitely the case with the next book as well, because the thief at the center of The Man Who Loved Books Too Much by Alison Hoover Bartlett really did love books, but felt that he was owed them out of a sense of entitlement. This man targeted book dealers, and using a tried and true method, he managed to get his hands on a number of books that he wanted without actually paying for them. As I've been reading more and more of these books, they seem like psychological studies as much as anything else, because it seems like the thieves are normally trying to validate something about themselves by trying to get their hands on something that they don't have. Whether it's power over others, a higher status within society, a sense of self-worth, establishment or re-establishment in a field, there's always that second element that seems to be propelling the crimes. And that's probably the most interesting part of this book on the list, because this author had far more access to this thief over a far longer period of time than any of the others. And this guy is very chatty. He has ample space to tell his story, and since he's a narcissist, he gives a lot of himself away, like, for instance, his deep sense of entitlement, his insecurity, and also other crimes that he committed that he was never actually arrested for. These two books about printed matter, The Map Thief and The Man Who Loved Books Too Much, are not nearly as complex as the previous two books that I discussed, and therefore I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you start with them, but they are both very interesting fixtures within this subgenre. Now onto the last two books on this list. These are definitely the two that I would recommend you read after you've maybe tried some of the others, after you've already gotten into this subgenre, but the first of those two is The Dinosaur Artist by Paige Williams. This is about a man who put a large fossil, a T. batar skeleton, which is a cousin of the T-Rex, up for auction. But right before it could be auctioned off, the Mongolian government intervened, alleging that he had taken the fossil illegally from Mongolia. This is the only one of the bunch where the illegality of the crime is somewhat questioned. Like, the politics of fossil excavation are very complex, and there's a whole discussion in here about fossils and artifacts and how ownership is determined, or really whether it can be determined. The thing that makes this book weaker than the other books on this list is that because of the somewhat cloudy nature of the crime, or really you could argue the lack of explicit motive to commit a crime, the central story, the story of the crime, is the least interesting part of this book. The side information, which is the stuff that merely enhances the story in the other books, is actually what pushes this book forward. So the history of fossil hunting, lots of Mongolian history, details about how a fossil is cleaned up and then assembled for display, and so on and so forth. It's an interesting book, but the true crime element falls short. And unfortunately, that is also true of the final book on this list. That's The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. Probably one of the most well-known books on this list, but in my opinion, not the best example of this subgenre. Just like in The Dinosaur Artist, the crime in this book is a lot more muddled. It's ostensibly about the theft of rare orchids from Florida, but I found it to be far more about the orchid world, the flower world, than it is about the crime. What makes this book worth reading is definitely Susan Orlean's writing. She has a talent for writing books that are fun to read, plain and simple. Otherwise, I probably would not recommend this book. So those are 6 books within this very strange subgenre that I wanted to mention in this video. But if you've heard of or have read any other books that fit this mold, please do tell me in the comment section below. I would love to read more. Also, please let me know if you'd be interested in other non-murder true crime recommendations videos. Obviously, we talked about thieving in today's video, but there are plenty of other crimes that books focus on, like fraud, for example. You can let me know those things or provide any other comments or questions you may have down in the comment section below. But if you'd prefer to find me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.